This story is entitled The Ugly, written by author Caleb Tutt. To whom it may concern, it is with great sorrow that I, Dr. Elizabeth Sinclair, on this date, the 17th of August, in the year 1922, hereby resign from the practice of medicine. I will attempt, to the best of my ability, to recount the events that have led to my resignation. You may question my sanity, as I once did myself. However, your belief, or lack thereof, in the veracity of my claims does not concern me. I trust my status within the medical community will stand on its own. It happened 6 nights ago. I received a strange telephone call from Mrs. Darcy Sutton. She asked that I rush over to her home as quickly as possible, that something was terribly wrong with her son. As a doctor, I rarely take house calls, but this one seemed paramount. By the time I arrived, Mrs. Sutton, whose kind eyes once brought hope to me during my darkest times, had cried away her tears. All that remained was fear. She told me 4 words which have played back in my mind like a tape recorder since that night. It's inside of him. Inside the quaint cottage, I found her son, Samuel, lying supine on the wooden kitchen table. He was 10 years old, gangly and bony as boys his age typically are. However, his stomach was bloated, similar to a corpse's abdomen when it inflates from methane gas expansion. His pale skin glistened sickly, and he spoke in guttural groans. The air around him was musty and barely breathable. The stench of sulfur gagged me. I could not help but seeing Samuel, my own father, lying supine on paper-thin hospital sheets. Chemotherapy was still experimental then. He lost his hair, his strength, his being. He was so ugly. When I try to remember him, I can't find the happy moments I'm sure we used to share. Instead, I find anger, resentment, crying in closets because of the milestones missed, the important moments he wasn't there for. I find in myself an ugliness. It is because of him I became Dr. Elizabeth Sinclair. I asked Mrs. Sutton to tell me what happened leading up to this point. She informed me that Samuel had become violently ill over the previous 3 days. A stomach virus, surely. She motioned toward the kitchen cabinets, all open, all empty. Regardless of the amount of food he consumed, he couldn't satisfy his ravenous hunger. I splayed my fingers across his stomach like a tent. His skin was cold and clammy. I moved my fingers around slowly, trying to determine the source of his pain. Something within his abdomen grazed the tips of my fingers with its own. I jerked my hand back, shaking. Samuel spoke weakly, too weak for me to hear. Whatever was inside of him was pressing on his diaphragm. I leaned in closer to hear his words. "Make it stop," he said to me. From his stomach, I heard something squelching, like when you pull your foot out of the mud and your shoe releases suction. The noise grew in intensity, squishing faster and louder. Mrs. Sutton and I watched helplessly as Samuel's stomach expanded further, his pasty skin stretching tight, then rolling over itself. And then, in one horrifying moment, it happened. Like an infected boil, Samuel's stomach ruptured open. Chunks of intestines and guts sprayed the ceiling. From the gaping wound, a bloody, grotesque bouquet of body parts burst out. Wriggling aimlessly, each appendage contorted in its own direction, trying to claw their ways out of his raw entrails. It was as if I was witnessing a drowning and could see only the flailing limbs of the victims as they tried desperately to pull themselves above water. Somehow, this abomination coordinated its mismatched limbs and dislodged itself from Samuel's body. I discovered the limbs were not separate entities, but instead attached to a central, horrendously disfigured face. For the briefest of moments, my mind replaced its face with my father's. The arms and legs and hands and feet extended outwards from the face, like limbs on a spider. Its first movements were jerky and awkward. Gaining its balance, it scuttered toward the kitchen, leaving behind a trail of wet blood. Mrs. Sutton cradled her son's corpse and cried, as if her tears could bring him back to life. I know what it is to wish beyond wishing that your sorrow could resurrect the dead. When she could not revive her son, she snatched a scalpel from my bag and, before I could stop her, slit her throat from ear to ear. Blood cascaded down her body in a torrential downpour, then escaped between the floorboards. My next memory is of the sun peering over the horizon, casting an oddly serene glow across the two mutilated bodies that lie in front of me. Stopping my legs from quivering, I stood up, then vomited until my throat was raw. I followed the streak of blood, looking for the creature that had expelled itself from Samuel's body. I was going to butcher it. I happened upon the malformed creature, curled next to the back door, unable to do anything but quiver like a terrified kitten. It was pitiful and ugly, and for a moment, the same anger I had at my father rose from the dark place in my soul. But this time, I released it, refused to allow that hatred to control me any longer. Some would suggest that it was a motherly instinct which kept me from harming this creature. I prefer to think of myself not as a woman, but as a human, one incapable of killing something just because it is ugly. As a woman of science, I have always believed there to be an explanation for any phenomena. It is with great sorrow I release such beliefs from my life, for today and all days coming. Formerly, Dr. Elizabeth Sinclair.